So now that we're able to go through a fixed list of prices that's hard-coded here into this program and into this code, as a next step, I want to make sure that we read these values here from a file. So in this project here, we should have a file that could be called prices.txt. And in that file, I want to have a bunch of prices like $9.99, $10.49, $15.89, whatever you want. Can also be some prices without decimal places. That is all allowed. For this program, I just want to have one price per line. And no empty line thereafter, just instead one price per line. That's what I want to have for this program. And the goal now is to take a look at that file and read the values in there and use those values in this calculation. And that's therefore what I'll work on next. So to read in these prices here, I'll actually add a new method here in my prices.go file, which of course also will get that job as a receiver argument, which I'll name load data. We could also name it load prices, that's up to you. Here I'll go for load data. And in here, I now want to read in the data from that prices.txt file. Now to do that, in prices.go, I'll start by importing another package here in addition to the FMT package, and that will be the OS package, because that gives us various functions we can use for dealing with the file system. Therefore, here in load data, we can now use this package to call the open function and open a file, and then step by step read in the content of that file. Now open, as you see, wants a string as an argument, so the path to the file, and here that will be prices.txt. So I'll use prices.txt as a file name here. Now, as a result of calling open, we'll get back a pointer to that file or an error if things go wrong. So we get the file or the error, and therefore, of course, we want to check if error is not equal to nil. So if we have an error, and in that case, we should do something. And here, for the moment, I'll just return and do nothing, but I will use the format package to print something to the console. An error occurred, and then maybe in a new line thereafter, the error that did occur. We could also write could not open file as an error message here. And then the details. So that's the error handling. If we make it past this if check, we will have access to the file though. And to read in those values, we can use another package that's built into Go, and that's the buff.io package, which gives us utility functions for dealing with input and output data, like a file that we opened. Because buff.io, for example, allows us to create a so-called scanner, which is a value that exposes methods that can be used for reading content, for example, from a file. So for reading line by line from an open file, which is very useful for what I'm trying to achieve here. So we can create such a scanner, and the scanner now needs the input source. Now it wants a value of type reader, and reader is actually a built-in interface that is implemented, for example, by this open function or by this file value that we're getting back, to be precise. This file value here implements this reader interface, and therefore we can use the file as an input argument to new scanner. As you see, we got no complaints by Go here. As a result, we'll get back a scanner value, which we can now use to scan our file line by line. So when we call scan here, we'll move forward one line and read the content of the line where we were. So we'll start in the first line, and if we then call scan, we'll read in the content of that line and move to the next line. And if we then call scan again, we'll repeat that for the next line, and therefore we'll step by step read all the lines. That's what scan does, but only one line at a time. Therefore, we can actually use it in a for loop because scan returns a boolean that will be false if there's nothing left to scan. So if there are no more lines to be read in that file. You also see that information here in this text. And that's of course very convenient because we can therefore use it as a condition in a for loop where we will keep on scanning as long as there is content to scan. Now, as I mentioned, we'll get a bunch of lines of text from that text file here. So therefore, we can create a helper variable, lines, which is a string slice, let's say. And we can then use the append function to generate a new slice based on the old lines slice with that scanned line appended. And we can get that scanned line, so the content of the line that was scanned, by accessing scanner.text. This function will give us the text content that was read in because of this scan operation. And as a result, we'll get back a new slice, which we can store back in the lines variable. So therefore, this lines slice here will in the end hold all these prices here as standalone elements, as standalone values in this slice. Now, it is possible for a scanner to error, and therefore we should also call scanner error, this function here, which will simply return an error if the scan operation yielded an error before. Because scan itself does not return an error, instead it will just return false if something goes wrong. And instead, this error function can then be called to find out if an error did occur earlier. So we want to call that here, and as a result, we'll get back this error that we can store in this error variable, which we already have from before. And we can and should check if error is not equal nil. So if we have an error, and in that case, I also want to return here, I don't want to continue with any other code, but of course, I want to output this error message, the details about that error, and a custom message that could be reading the file content failed. And in addition, since we opened the file here, we should also now close it. We should always do that when we're done working on it, even if an error occurred. And therefore, I also want to call file close here. So the built-in close method on this file value. That's what we should check, but if we make it past this if check, we'll know that we successfully read in all these lines of text from that prices.txt file. And therefore, as a next step, we can then use these prices, of course.